Hello! Welcome to the second Modest Mash Macros video. In the previous video, I showed the basic use of the Guardian level 100 macros. In this video, I'll show how to copy those macros to another character, then tweak them for that character, and then I'll demo them in a dungeon. You're looking at Shandira, a level 91 Night Elf Druid. She, like Thori, is also a Resto Druid with Guardian Spec as a secondary specialization. I've gone ahead and set up the talents the same as Thori's, with Feline Swiftness, Ysera's Gift, Typhoon, Soul of the Forest, Mighty Bash, and Dream of Cenarion. Of course, I can't choose Pulverize yet because she's not level 100. I've also set up the Glyphs the same way, the major ones Maul, Barkskin, and Dash, and the minor ones Aquatic Form, Predator, and Grace. I've also gone ahead and removed all the spells from the action bars, all 6 action bars, and from the different forms. I've left the spell from Call to Arms so that I don't have that sitting in the middle of the screen, but in cat form as well, I have removed all the spells from the action bar. The first thing we need to do then is to create a macro, a single macro for Shandira. And we do that by typing /m, enter, and we get the create macros screen. There we will click on new, and I'll just type new macro as the name of the macro, and click OK. We have now created a macro. We don't have to type anything into it or any command. We just exit, and World of Warcraft will create the macro file in the appropriate folder on your file system, on your disk. So now we log out and go copy the macro from Thori's YouTube video. Logging out, and here's Thori's YouTube video. We go down to the description, and in the description we go down to where it says macro, and we start copying from the first line after that word all the way to the bottom. Shift click and Control C to copy, and now I go to the folder system, and I find my C drive where World of Warcraft is installed. I find program files times 86. I open it and go all the way to the bottom where I find World of Warcraft. That's the default location. You'll have to find your own installation if you've changed that. Once you open World of Warcraft, you go to the bottom to the WTF file. Open that, and you should see an account folder. In the account folder, you should find your account name. In my case, it's Taurus. I open it up, and those are the list of the servers in which I have characters, and Shandira is in Area 52. I click on Shandira's folder, and you can see that the last file in that folder is called macros cache. If I click on it, I can see the contents, and in the contents I can see that the name that I gave the macro, new macro, is listed there. So I will open that file, select all, and then paste the text that I copied from Thori's YouTube video description. I can close that file and save. And now we can see that the contents of that file are the ones we copied from Thori's text. And we can go back now to World of Warcraft and log in again with Shandira. Okay, log back in with Shandira. We want to make sure that we are looking at action bar 1. Then we are going to open the macro window, /m, enter. We go to Shandira's specific macros, and we see there that we have imported Thori's macros. So now we drag to slot number 1 from the macro window, the G11 button. In slot number 2, we're going to put the G21 macro. In slot number 3, we're going to put the G31. Slot 4, G41. Slot 5, the G51. In slot 7, the 07cc macro. In slot 8, the 08 flea macro. And in slot 10, the 10 cat button macro. Then we switch to cat form, and we do the same thing again. Slot 1, G11, slot 2, G21, slot 3, G31, and so forth. I've named the macros so that it's easy to know what button they go to, but they're not so straightforward because I sometimes use macros that belong to one group, to one slot, and I use it in another slot. So bear with me for now. The action bar 1 is very straightforward, but as soon as I finish with the bear, action bar 2 will go more carefully. So we have action bar 1 for Shandira, for cat, and for bear. They're all the same, except for the call of arms, which is in the last position of the action bar 1 for the bear form. Now we switch to action bar 2. And in action bar 2, in slot number 1, we're going to put G12. In slot number 2, we're going to put G13. You will see the reason for that is that in action bar number 1, where slot number 2 is G21, let's take a look at that macro. That macro is Mangle and Maul. It ends with a line that says go to action bar 2 from 1 to 2. When we go to action bar number 2, I want it to then use the macro that does thrash and lacerate. And that one takes it back to action bar number 1. The 1-1 will force it to go to action bar 1 no matter which action bar you are at. So continuing with action bar number 2, in the 3rd slot, we're going to put G31, 4th slot, G41, 5th slot, G51, and in the 7, 8, and 10, the same ones always. Action bar number 3, we're going to put G13 in slot number 1, and G13 in slot number 2, and from then on G31 in 3, G41 in 4, G51 in 5, and again 7, 8, and 10 will be the same. So all the macros are set up the way Thori has them. We can close the create macro window, but first of all, let's go through what each macro does. The slot number 1 is what I call the heal macro. It's what I mash when the health is approaching 50%. It will do Mangle and Frenzied Regeneration. It will switch to Bear Form if I'm not in Bear Form. And it will switch the action bar to action bar number 2. So if I go to action bar number 2, this is what gets clicked. It switches to Bear Form if you're not in Bear Form. If you're pressing Alt, then and in combat, it will use whatever items you have in your 4th bag in the first row. So I will keep there a potion for health. I will keep there a potion for agility. The next one will be some item that will increase either my agility or my armor or anything useful for the tank. I will also have, I can include a health stone, but I do have a special line for health stone since sometimes the health stone gets automatically put in your bag and you forget to put it in one of those 4 slots. So the health stone will get used automatically if you press Alt. If you're not pressing Alt and you're in combat, it will cycle through Barkskin and Survival Instincts and again Barkskin when you mash this macro. Then it'll switch to action bar number 3, where the 3rd macro will then use Berserk, Pulverize, if you press Alt, and if you don't press Alt, it will be cycling between Thrash and Lacerate. It will always be resetting to Thrash as the first one to perform if you click on a new target. It will also reset to Thrash in 2 seconds if you have not used the macro in 2 seconds. So this macro will always start with Thrash. Notice that we do not have to remove the cast Pulverize even if Shandira is not at level 100 and does not have Pulverize, because the rest of the spells will get performed anyway, and when she becomes 100 and I choose Pulverize as her next talent, it will then be ready to be used without my having to come back and change the macro. So you can just leave Pulverize there. So those are the 3 macros that are used in my heal button. My second button is number 2. I call that the Tank and Spank macro. That's the main button I use, and it starts with Mangle and Maul instead of Frenzied Regeneration, and it'll switch to action bar 2, where it will then do the Thrash Lacerate macro that we spoke about earlier. The 3rd button, the 3rd slot, is the one I call the ranged macro. It's for when the target has moved away from melee distance and I need to approach him either with a Skull Bash, I'll dash towards him, or if I need to get aggro from that target, it will growl at that target, and it will also attack with the only ranged attacks that the bear form has, Fairy Fire, and even though Thrash is not far ranged, it does hit an area of 8 yards, so it's a little better than nothing, so it'll do Thrash anyway. The 4th slot is what I call the trigger macro. In the event that Mangle has a critical hit, then Healing Touch will become free and usable in bear form. It becomes lit up. You'll see it in the action bar if that happens, and you can just click on it and it will heal you. I normally like to leave it lit, knowing that if anyone dies, then Rebirth also becomes instant spell and castable in bear form. So I can just click on a dead party member and use rebirth immediately. The fifth slot is the one I call the interrupt, and whenever I see an opponent casting a spell that I don't want them to cast, I don't mash that button, I just click it once, the way I would with number 4, and that will interrupt the spell, or attempt to, because they do have cooldowns. And or if I see that, or if I predict that the target is going to use a very strong attack, I can also try to stun them and interrupt them from causing that attack. In this case, we will do a tweak, because this macro uses Thori's racial War Stomp, and because Shandira does not have War Stomp, that spell would never allow Mighty Bash to be used. So we will tweak this macro for Shandira, and it has a cast sequence. That means it cycles between War Stomp and Mighty Bash. What I will do is just click right before Mighty Bash and backspace to remove War Stomp. Now I'm going to open the spell window and look for Mighty Bash. And we're going to see that the cooldown for Mighty Bash is 50 seconds. So I'm going to change the reset from 120 to 50. So it now reads cast sequence reset is 50 equals 50, Mighty Bash, comma, null. The reason for the null and for keeping it in a cast sequence instead of a cast, like with Skull Bash below, is that Skull Bash, and let's go read Skull Bash, has a cooldown of 15 seconds. So you want Skull Bash to take place whenever it's available, but Mighty Bash, if we kept them both together, would not allow Skull Bash to take place. By having null, this macro will perform Mighty Bash when Mighty Bash is available, and if you keep hitting it before the 50 seconds are up, it will try to do a null, which basically says do nothing, and it will allow Skull Bash to perform. So this way, in 2 lines, I can have spells that normally cannot be compatible one above the other. Skull Bash would never take place if I had a simple cast on Mighty Bash. So by doing it this way, I can have Mighty Bash be used and Skull Bash in the same macro. So now this is tweaked for Shandira. If we look at 07cc, you'll see that if you hold down Control, you can click on the button, and it will perform Cyclone for a CC. If you hold Alt, you can do Typhoon. I use that for BGs. And if you don't click on anything, it will do Entangling Roots, which is a good way to CC one of the UPCs in a dungeon to keep them out of action. Sorry, NPCs. If we look at the 08 Flee, this basically, if you don't press Alt, and if you're in stealth, it will use dash. If you press it again, it'll use Stampeding Roar. If you're not in stealth, it will turn into cat form. If you're indoors, and it will alternate between cat form and bear form indoors. Outdoors, it will alternate between cat form and travel form. If you press Alt, it will do Stampeding Roar first and dash second, even if you're not in stealth. So if you're not in stealth or being attacked in combat, you use Alt to flee, and it will try to use Stampeding Roar and dash. If we look at 10 cat, pressing Alt will buff you. This is in the position 10 is what I normally put as a buff macros. So the Alt will do Mark of the Wild. If you're not pressing Alt, it will try to use Prowl to get you into stealth and cat form. If you're in combat or if you cannot go into Prowl, it will turn you into cat, and it will try to do Shred if you're in stealth, and it will cycle between Thrash, Shred, and Ferocious Bite. So you could use that button. You could mash that button to stay in cat form and do attacks in cat form. But I mostly use it just to get into stealth or to do the buffs before a dungeon. So those are the uses of the those are the details of the macros. Now we can go test them out in a dungeon. So I'll sign Shandira up for a dungeon, which will be the real acid test for the installation of the macros. We'll find group. And because she's a tank, we don't have to wait very long. Okay, so the first thing I do is press Alt, click 0, buff everybody, turn into bear form. I want to see if the group says anything, so I'll be in general. And fingers on, pinky on the tab, and mashing number 2, clicking on the other target, make sure I have the aggro. Health a little down, so I'm using number 1. Back to number 2. And those are down. I'll use 3 just to pull. I'll switch targets to make sure I have aggro, causing thrash. It's a very good healer, so I don't think I'll have any problem. That I did just using macro number 2 and just a lot of switching of targets. I'm just mashing button number 2. I'll do mash number 1. I did 1 click of the 3 just to get aggro, because it'll do the growl. I interrupted with 5 there. I'm a little lost right now. Okay. Clicking number 2 by switching. I'm using Thrash, so it hits the Maul. Just clicking number 2. Switching targets. That switches to Thrash. Even if I don't switch targets, it will still use Cycle, Thrash, and Lacerate. But that way I can control how quickly I want it to happen, not just wait for the macro to get to it. Boy, there's a lot of these little things. A little annoying. I'm going to do 4 to interrupt. 5 to interrupt. And then go back to number 2 and just mash it. Okay. Sometimes even when I see that an opponent is casting a spell that says shielded, I still use the interrupt because sometimes it still works. Poor healer. And now to the boss. The healer is full of mana. I tried 5 there, it did not work. But whenever you see a casting that you think you can interrupt, that's the time to press it. I'm not going to worry about the aggro of the ad. Just get rid of this boss. Great DPS. Stunned, I can keep mashing, and even if you're stunned and not doing any of your regular spells, you should keep mashing because sometimes there are spells in the macros that can be performed while stunned. For instance, Barkskin. Which would only be performed if I'm pressing button 1. I'm going to start pressing it right now since I was at 50. Ease off for the healer. Back to number 2 since I'm at full health. I want to point out I don't have too great gear. I have very recently gotten the expansion. In fact, this is the first time Shandira is doing this dungeon. Okay, I imagine it's left here, I'm not too sure. I took out the one that was walking rather than the one that was just standing over there. In case he's a pat, then I can walk on the side here, not call unnecessary attention from the other mobs. Oh. Surprise. I'm gonna try interrupt. No, no interrupt. Big place. Okay, looking for the possible caster. Someone pulled first. I'll try to get aggro quick. Five did not interrupt, but I tried. I'm just mashing number 2. Interrupting with 5, just one click. Mash back to mashing number 2. I also look at the lacerate. If I get it to 1, sometimes I get all the mobs to 1 and then keep cycling through them to 2. Interrupted there. Oh, a pat is joining. Interrupted. Let me get aggro from that guy. Okay. All I did was keep mashing 2 on him. The thrash was enough to pull the aggro. When it doesn't work, that's when I'll use 3 and that'll growl. Let's interrupt. Oh, I was stunned. Going to 1. Okay. I think it's that way. Healer is completely full of mana. He may have too much spirit. I'm using Alt 1 now. That uses an item in my bag. Back to 1. I have to keep this guy from being behind me. Interrupt. Doing 1 now. Interrupt. No, it was used up. Still on cooldown. Number 2. Getting the aggro from the other one. I did 3. Did a growl on him. Interrupting. Just number 2. I do get nervous in when I'm in combat, and which is why I came up with the mash idea. I just want my frequency of mashing to reflect my nervousness. So you'll hear me mash really fast when I'm in a tight spot. If not, I just keep cycling. You can see them cycling 1 and 2 in the action bar at the bottom. I'm doing 1 now, so you see it cycling between 1, 2, and 3. So the macro is working very well. We installed it correctly. All the spells seem to be performing. I did a number 3 there to dash to him. So that's why you see a fairy fire on him. Lacerate is stacked to number 3. I did a 3 again to dash back, a skull bash. The healer is getting hit. I'm going to interrupt the cinematic. I'm following the hunter. He seems to know which way to go because he's jumping. Everyone knows the jumpers know what they're doing. And we wait for the group. Oh, I see the healer. They went the other way. Are they getting hit? Yes, they're getting hit. I'll take. That used the dash. I used 3 for growl and fold. Okay. Well, I got to show the dash button, which was the Alt 8. And this shows how convenient it is to have the macros because there's so few buttons. I don't have, it becomes second nature to know which button to press. And I don't have to be looking at any place else. I didn't even look at the keyboard to take care of that situation. Oh, there's casters back there. So I'm a very casual player. I am not pro. I'm doing button 1 now. Getting on the side here, moving out of the way from the fiery floor. Doing number 2. But the macros help me be a better tank that I could ever be if I didn't have macros. Takes care of, I only had to think about the rotation and how I wanted the spells to work once. I spent a long time at it, but once I had it, I don't have to think about it again. Is someone dead? Oh, okay. They're back. Oh, he fell off. health down, so I'm doing button 1 now. Back to 2. See, Mangle was reset by Lacerate, and I just kept mashing because the macro will perform Mangle as soon as it's available. We have to wait for the other team member. Or we don't. That other mob needs to pull aggro, so I'd pull him. I think a team member is getting hurt. I'm doing button 1 now. I'm not sure. Button 2. Button 1. He's being revived by the healer. I saved the rebirth for if we have a situation later on. I'll take this guy that's alone. Hope he doesn't call the others. Trying 5. Oh, it worked. Interrupted. Even if it was shielded, the Mighty Bash interrupted that one. Okay. Somehow I think these 3 will come together. Let's try to interrupt that. No. Trying to stay in the circle. Interrupting. No. Interrupting that with 5. Back to 2. Just using 2 here. And seems to be the final boss now. Take him from the side, away from the other team members. Interrupt with 5. 1 click. Let's face him back. Interrupt. 5 is still on cooldown. My healer is getting hurt. So I did a 3 and then went back to the boss. Just to pull attention away from why is my healer getting hit. And I did a 4 there on my healer, brought him up a bit in health. And dungeon complete. I thank the healer, everybody else is gone, and I leave the instance. Well, that is how the macros got installed. That's how we tweak them. That's how we use them. I hope you have gotten the information you need to be able to set it up for your own characters, and hope you enjoy them. They can be used for even lower levels, and they just need tweaking here and there. If you need any help with any other level or any questions, just comment below the videos and I will help in any way I can. So the next video will be Death Knight, Blood and Frost. So hope you're interested and come back to see the macros for that. So till next time, hope all is well.